discussions with him. Looking forward to hearing the presentation. Like Elena just mentioned, every time I hear Peter, I tend to learn something new. I'm a long-term resident of the Mount Haven section of the Bronx since the 70s, and I am gleefully happy to be part of the Bronx Borough Preservations Committee.
Thank you, Sam.
Hi, my name is Dante Mckellar, and I'm a United States Navy veteran. First, I want to just say greetings to all of our elected officials who are joining us, and in the citywide officials as well. And I just want to say to all of the Bronxites, thank you all for being a part of this wonderful committee meeting. We are new, but again, like Diego said, a lot of us has been involved in our communities. I myself have moved to New York in 1982, and I moved into Hunts Point in 2013. And I love this area. I love working with the community and being involved. So I'm going to turn this back to Diego, but I just want you to know my name is Dante Mckellar. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me by dantemckellar@gmail.com.
Thank you, Dante. And as I was saying, we're going to have Petr Stand as our speaker today. Peter is an architect who has been part of several affordable housing projects in the South Bronx. He worked with Nosqueramos, and he's going to be talking about some of the projects that he's going to be part of. So welcome, Peter.
Good evening, everyone. How do you do? So let me, I'm going to start my timer here because I tend to go on and on and on and on. I'm going to begin this by, who am I, right? So you guys get a little orientation. I'm a Bronx native. I'm a Bronx resident. I studied architecture at the City College School of Architecture in the early 1970s. And that is where I became involved for the first time in community development. Lacking a job one summer, I volunteered for the Manhattan Valley Development Corporation, one of the first community development corporations in the city. And I found that work fascinating. Architecture made sense when I was talking to people, moved it beyond the realm of, you know, pure object without really relating to the people, the community around it. My work in housing started then. I interned for the chief architect's office on the Roosevelt Island housing development for 2 years in my last years of college. I administered the sweat equity housing programs for the Human Resources Administration in the end of the Beam administration, beginning of the Koch administration. That's where I made some contacts. For instance, that's where I first met Harry Di Rienzo, for instance, the founder of Banana Kelly. And that work was also incredibly empowering and very inspirational. I worked in all the boroughs. In the Bronx at that time, it was the People's Development Corporation up on Washington Avenue in the 170s. From there, I worked for several firms, one doing high-rise 40-story condo towers. And I left that and joined a firm called Cooper Robertson. They're the planners for Battery Park City. And they gave me a client to handle. And I don't want to get into political discussions because he's got a really hot button name at the moment. It was Andrew Cuomo, who was head of HELP. We worked together for several years, developing affordable housing on the, what was then called the 8585 program in Brooklyn. Some work on Welfare Island, as well as up in Westchester County. And from that point, from Cooper, a college friend of mine and I formed our firm. It was called MAP Architects. And around that time, when you start an architectural practice, you actually starve for a couple of years. I was asked to teach a fourth-year design studio at the City College School of Architecture. which was also incredible in many ways. The students came from all the boroughs. We had actually quite a number of international students at the time. And so I'll get to Melrose because my partner said to me one afternoon, man, you know, I think our first commission was to do a parking lot. We were really dying on the limb. And he said, man, we got to create a client. You have to go out and we have to go out and do something. I was doing jury duty a week later. And I don't know if any of you remember eating in the court deli about 30 plus years ago. The food was kind of awful. It's a lot better today. And I had this really rotten set of French fries, and I got so upset. I thought, you know, what is happening? Our borough is falling apart. City doesn't care. There are so many reasons for this. If you understand the history of the Bronx, right? We were the first borough. We're as per the 1960 census, the non-white population outnumbered the white population, and there was an incredible loss of political power. And so there was, as I went back to the courthouse, I picked up a copy of the Daily News, and they announced a meeting at Hostess College for the following weekend called the Bronx Center Project. Freddie Ferreira was borough president. This was 1992. And I went to that conference and met a whole bunch of people. The head of development for the borough at the time was Bert Zimmerman. He was the former head of city planning, Bronx Office of City Planning. Freddie had hired him as his development director. I had met Bert in college because he went to Hunter School of Planning. At the same time, I was in architecture school, and we were part of a citywide student organization of design schools. And so I got involved. I stayed for 2 days. I stayed for the conference and was invited back the second day, where I was asked to chair a housing committee. We were an interdisciplinary design group on Bronx Center. We had a education and cultural committee. We had a health committee. We had housing. We had open space, public transportation, each one headed by a different individual, all under the mandate. The borough at the time was looking at a multi-million-dollar investment. This is before the Hall of Justice, the new courthouse, was built. At the time, if any of you recall, I know Paul probably remembers this because he taught at IS 151, but there used to be a bridge across the old tracks called the Milk Bridge that was going to be replaced, and the police academy was coming up to the Bronx. And then there was the Fed DOT was going to invest money in the Grand Concourse. And then, looking at the map in front of you, there was Melrose Commons. Melrose Commons had been in planning for many years. What we discovered is that the city planners, they were terrified of this area. They had probably all seen that ridiculous film, Fort Apache, the Bronx, which was used the 42nd precinct as its space. And they would get in their cars and they would drive through Melrose, but they wouldn't get out of their cars. It was really pretty stunning. Anyway, so we were tasked by the borough president. It was a pro bono project. RPA was supporting this. And I reconnected with Harry DiRienzo at the time. Ron Schiffman, any of you guys know him, he was the city planning commissioner at the time, originally from the Bronx, but taught at Pratt, and a number of other people. And the question was, the center question of Bronx Center was, is there such a thing as a downtown Bronx? And we all came to our own conclusions. Ultimately, the answer is no. The Bronx is a collection of villages and towns that have grown together. My downtown, I live in Kingsbridge Heights, is on Broadway between 231st and 238th Street. If you live in Woodlawn, you're going to Katona Avenue, right? And so all of our neighborhoods, because they were originally towns, have their own sense of downtown, have their own sense of place. You know, unlike Brooklyn, which was a city, right? And anyway, so the ultimate conclusion of all of this is that Bronx doesn't really have a downtown in that sense. But what did come out was Melrose Commons. Melrose Commons at the time was the largest assemblage of city-owned land, over 65% of it. And if you want to go down to the slide, the next one, Diego. Up, or we're jumping ahead. So this is, I mean, we'll get to that. So this just kind of looks at really quickly. No, this is fine. Really quickly, the borough between the 1960s and the 1980s had a real radical shift. To give you an example, my mom's family first came here in the late 1920s. They lived on Brook Avenue and 147th Street. The language spoken on the street at the time was German, all German, right? That morphed by the 30s into a very large Italian community. These two populations, by the way, replaced the original Irish community that lived there. By the 1960s through the 1980s, we saw a tremendous shift beginning in the 50s. A number of Puerto Rican folk began moving into the neighborhood. African Americans began moving into the neighborhood. The 60s came, the census happened. For Robert Moses, all of a sudden reared his wonderfully ugly head and smashed through the neighborhoods. And the borough really began to lose its sense of integrity. And I mean integrity in the sense of this was a wholesome place. The Bronx is the borough of parks and universities because of the density of our parks and the number of colleges that were up here. And so by the 90s, as you know, arson, fires happened all over the borough. They kind of slowed down as they hit Fordham Road. In this area, you can see that the little photo on the left was fairly devastated. So, city had proposed this urban renewal area. We had seen the stories of urban renewal when the Upper West Side was depopulated in the late 50s, only to take 30 years to be reborn. We held through the Bronx Center project, if you want to go to the next slide, we held a meeting at Hostess College to discuss the urban renewal plan. And a number of folk jumped up and started yelling and screaming at us. It turns out the first urban renewal for this area had been proposed during the Roosevelt administration. This section of the Bronx, as it began, was the most rapidly urbanized area in the United States. Because with the construction of the subway lines, this borough that had been large estates and farms was rapidly transformed into suburban communities supporting businesses in Manhattan. That later expanded to the Bronx waterfront, where the Bruckner Expressway is now, over in Hunts Point, because of the industries that were located here. And so by the 1930s, a lot of these speculative buildings were falling apart. And so they were angry, they were upset. And we said to them, there were four of us up on that stage. Myself, a landscape architect by the name of Lee Weintraub, who was also from the Bronx, Ron Schiffman and Harry DiRienzo. You can imagine the impact, four white guys standing on a stage at Lincoln Hospital. We said we were different. We met everybody the following day at, her name was Dolores Lasante. Dolores was Italian. She and her sister moved to the Bronx in the 1950s, early 50s, by the late 50s, and they moved to an Italian community. They had purchased homes catty corner from each other. And as the community changed around them, they became avid community gardeners. Being community gardeners, they were really in touch with a lot of local events, local politics, because at that time, as our gardens were growing in the borough, they became real centers of public conversations about school, about life, about family. And they were the ones, together with some of their colleagues, Yolanda Garcia, whose family owned a carpet store on the corner of 153rd Street and 3rd Avenue, kind of began to say, why are you not including us? Why is city planning coming here and just telling us what they think we want? Right, so we met them, we said we're different. They challenged us to meet us on the street. So we met at Dolores's place, Cortlandt Avenue and 158, between 158th and 159th Street. And both Harry and Ron put out 2 organizers. And within less than a month, Nos Quedamos had begun to form of local residents and business owners. They did an extraordinary thing. They began to register people to vote. And they registered enough people to vote. This was the leading to the election between David Dinkins and Rudy Giuliani that it really concerned the Dinkins administration. And the request was to suspend the planning, hold the planning sessions in Melrose, not downtown, once a week. And they asked for a 6-month period in which to renegotiate the plan. You were looking at a flyover of Melrose Commons that was done in 1994. And you can see all the open lots. That's PS, what is that? PS 129 over there on the right-hand side of Melrose Avenue. Right across the street from it, the empty lot is where Nos Quedamos is located today. And all those streets have now been filled in with various and sundry apartment buildings, townhouses, and over the course of the next 20 years from here to now, over 1 million square feet of affordable residential space, and over 250,000 square feet of commercial and community facilities have been developed there. So I was instrumental in working with Nos Quedamos and negotiating with the city of New York. They asked if I would participate with them as their architect. And we began to do several things. We created a digital model, for instance, of the site. We began working with the Environmental Simulation Center, which had some really interesting software to be able to take a look at actually what it was. We actually posted this in the window of the office so people could come by. Within a year or 2 of this, we were awarded the largest grant, an architectural grant by the New York State Council of the Arts, as well as money from the Astor Foundation. And we began to hold workshops for the next 2 years. The first 6-month period obviously was the most intense as we mapped every single block. If you want to go to the next slide. You can see here's a planning session. That's Yolanda Garcia, the woman on the right side of the table. These are some people who have owned a home in the area that was the city wanted to knock down. So she was helping, the group was helping people both negotiate sales prices with the city and using that as also another leverage tool. You'll see that big drawing on the wall in back of them. That is slowly being filled in as every block was mapped. Doors were knocked on, questionnaires about how people saw the neighborhood were handed out, and they were invited to join our planning sessions. So, next slide, please. I'm trying to keep cognizant of the time. This little chart actually was put together by Jessica Clemente. Jessica is the current director of Nos Quedamos. And this was part of the revisioning of the organization a few years ago. But you can see it speaks to all those elements that we began with. Engagement, reclaiming public space, building community through the arts, youth empowerment, better police community relations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These pieces were all part of the discussions in the early days. Next, please. So as we began to move closer to this, we began to develop a real basic site plan. We challenged several of the zoning issues that were around at the time. The city wanted to strip commercial zoning from Melrose Avenue because they thought that this place was so impoverished that it could never possibly recover. What they didn't understand at the time is that the head of HPD, who had formerly been with NYCHA, had done a study to show that this area could absorb 40,000 square feet of commercial space. That supermarket and pharmacy and laundry needs and medical needs were not being met at the time. And so we fought. We also upzoned 3rd Avenue so that we could get taller buildings in there that would allow a commercial base. And at the same time, Nostradamus was very environmentally sensitive, and they fought to reduce parking requirements. And so you can see this is a basic mapping diagram. All these diagrams were done to pull people into the process, to say that we hadn't made up our minds, but we were open to discussion and information. Next, please. This is one of my favorite sketches. It was done by Albert Messiah. Albert Messiah was a homeless guy and an avid community gardener. He would come by Nostradamus once a week and have lunch and sit in on the meetings. That previous slide, he's the gentleman with the beard on the left. And there he is standing up. That's Albert right there. And this sketch of his shows his ideas of a new development, a tree in the center, community gardens, a bookstore, and housing rotating around all of this activity. It was inspirational in many ways, and it was delightful. And we kind of began to use this information. Next, please. So now I'm gonna leap forward. We held an intense negotiation. Originally, the city wanted to do, the only program they had going for housing at the time was the New York City Housing Partnership. And they had really wanted to take 3rd Avenue and develop 2-family homes. And 3rd Avenue, as you know, is a truck route. It's a major commercial street. It's a major connector through the borough. The people at Nostradamus said they would block the bulldozers. They would stop development because to ruin this street for the next generation, to put inappropriate development there. And they argued strenuously for Elton Avenue. Elton is a much narrower street. It's on the high ground. And so what you're looking at is Plaza de Los Angeles. It's the first development in Melrose Commons. They are 3-family townhouses that, and they do not have parking pads in the front because the idea at the time was don't suburbanize the borough, right? Don't cut the sidewalk with curb cuts. Develop housing, put together a homeowners association, have parking and little decks in the backs of the houses. I put this photograph here also because we were also looking for context at the time. That church you see was built in the 1890s. It's a Methodist church. When I was working in Melrose, everyone referred to it as the German church. Again, I'll remind you, 100 years ago, this area, the German language was spoken in. And the bricks on the church were Bronx bricks, and I actually found almost identical bricks in brickyards in the Northeast Bronx. And so we were looking for context. Next, please. This is 3rd Avenue. This was a photograph taken a bunch of years ago. We were actually awarded by the Municipal Art Society an award for urban design. You're looking at, on the left-hand side is the building La Puerta de Vitalidad. It was the first multifamily. It was built under the Permanent Housing for the Homeless program, where 51% of the residents come out of Tier 2 shelters. You'll see that brown wall right behind La Puerta. That is the Aurora. That is a condominium building. What you don't see on the other side, on the western side, are townhouses. At the time, the commissioner of HPD told us, you can't build for sale townhouses on the same block that you put up homeless housing. Actually, the city of Rochester had done that, and we had met at a public meeting, the mayor of Rochester, who said, we had no issues. It worked well. It's the same community. And indeed, the townhouses sold out 30 days after construction began because it was such a hunger. To the right of it is La Carazza, the terraces, originally a condominium. We were developing this building when 2008 happened. The collapse of the financial market, the collapse of the housing market. We didn't lose the job, and we had to convert all the paperwork in the last moment to a rental building. And so you're looking at a new dynamic. When you walked on the street in 1992, by the way, this is all empty lots, right? All empty lots. Next slide, please. This is our next development. This is La Casa De Felicidad. We understood that there was a significant aging population in Melrose. And this was built under the HUD 202 guidelines for senior citizens residents. You'll notice a number of the buildings, when you look at these, have these corner elements. Again, this is, at the time, is a very strongly Hispanic community. Corners and little plazas we tried to incorporate as entrances to all the buildings because we felt it was kind of culturally appropriate. What you're looking here, that central corner element, are living rooms. Each floor has access to one of these. They're very large. There's television, couches, coffee tables. Because working with HUD, we understood that the average age of a resident back in the late 90s was about 82 or 83. And so we try to provide in the design of this kind of communal gathering spaces. A lot of this stuff was based on information we garnered through workshops, et cetera, et cetera. Next, please. Ooh, I've got 4 minutes to go. This is Jardin De Celine. This is our LEED gold building. This challenged a number of assumptions for the city. This building was built, all the other sites that you've seen were part of the urban renewal area. They were designated urban renewal sites. This was not. This site was jointly purchased with Nos Quedamos from a person who owned it. And this is affordable housing that goes across 4 income brackets. It has one of the first new medical facility in Melrose in many years at its base. And as I said, it is a LEED gold building. Next slide. This is the lobby of El Jardine. That's the background of my screen. This lobby, actually, this mosaic extends from inside the lobby and wraps around to the street corner. I got a phone call the 2 days after the scaffolding went down to go, wow, just like the Fish Building. If you guys are aware of what the Fish Building is, it's on the Grand Concourse. It has this beautiful fish mosaic on the outside of it. This design was put together. My wife is an avid photographer, and we wanted to get some elements. We spent a day photographing in the botanical gardens, tiled them all together, and my project architect said, yes, but we need flowers from the Caribbean, not your Bronx flowers. And so she began to play with that idea. El Jardin de Celine, the Gardens of the Moon. And voila, this mosaic. Next, please. So part of what has happened to me in my work in Melrose Commons is that I've met a lot of extraordinary people. This was a map. We were invited by, if you're aware of Open House New York, prior to the pandemic, it was the Architectural and Urban Design Weekend in New York City. And we were asked by the open house group if we could conduct walking tours. And so you're looking at our digital map, which has now been filled in with a lot of developments. I don't know if she's still here, but Elena Martinez of the Bronx Music Heritage Center. I mean, she is one of the many extraordinary people I have met during my years working here. Under her guidance and direction, we've used this map, and up until the pandemic, for the couple of years before that, we were holding an annual parranda through Melrose on the solstice, on the December solstice. Next. So I'll just leave this here for a moment. And so let me kind of, what do I got? I got a minute to go on your time schedule here. So the work of Nos Quedamos, our work continues. One of the ways in which I met Elena and one of my other significant colleagues these days, Edwin Pagan, excuse me, is that we got a large grant from the Department of Cultural Affairs to form the Bronx Cultural Collective, which was additionally, we also use this. We wrote a proposal which reflects the current work of Nos Quedamos to create a community land trust. One of the questions that was asked of me during this whole process was, why didn't we create a land trust to begin with? This is posed to me by, stop. Excuse me, guys. Why didn't we think of it? So there was an RFQ. The city of New York is looking for ways to maintain affordability in housing. They put out an RFEI, or Request for Expressions of Interest, a bunch of years ago on the formation of community land trusts, and working with Nos Quedamos, Eddie Pagan, Ray Figueroa of actually my couple of my sons, we put together an idea called the South Bronx Land and Community Resource Trust. Got accepted by HPD and went through 2 years at the Enterprise Foundation of a Learning Exchange. This South Bronx Community Land and Community Resource Trust is one of the current larger initiatives of Nos Quedamos, in order to both maintain affordability and increase kind of community participation in the work that's going on. So I want to end this up and open it up if anyone has any questions. But the way I want to do this is by reflecting on the pandemic. And the pandemic here in the city has caused a tremendous number of changes. We've seen streets shut down. We've seen outdoor dining move into curb locations. We've been witnessing ways in which people want to take advantage and use public space more and more. And we know that for many years, they're going to be, in a sense, PTSD that we're all going through, as hopefully things will change. What does that mean for our borough? What does that mean for the city? How do you begin to, and we also, by the way, just to underscore the point, this past year has also revealed really deeply the entrenched racist policies that are executed through a number of the forms of urban design and development that are going on. And that our essential workers who come from our communities here in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, how they are essential, and yet still here we are towards the end of the pandemic and everybody claps and cheers, but does it go beyond that? And quite frankly, it doesn't look that way. How do we take this? How do we transform portions of our borough to reflect these changes, to increase public space and access to public space, to begin to bring in newer ideas, different ideas. I had a conversation with community gardeners. Years ago, I worked on a design competition for Beirut in Lebanon along the Green Line. I learned a tremendous amount on the nature of Islamic design. New York, we deal in Western design, right? We know in Melrose and around there, a very large Arab community is moving into the borough, and a West African community. How do we adapt to their cultural norms and needs? How can we integrate them? And directly, when I was speaking to gardeners, they're going to want to arrange things differently than you do because they see the world and the design of the world in a different way, right? And to me, all of these challenges have been underlined by the pandemic, but I actually think it provides us with a phenomenal opportunity to work on community development, to work on bringing out the culture in the borough. You know, I think, and I'll end it on this, one of my greatest fears, I even see it in this neighborhood, is that we are going to become, like Mott Haven, the new Williamsburg. And we're going to engage in a homogenized design. And slowly, the folk who have been here, who have been through the years, who have built schools and gardens and gotten involved in preserving cultural institutions, are going to be moved out. How do we work with that? How do we prevent that? And at the same time, how can the borough evolve? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you. You can take this. By the way, Project Abigail, just to show it up there. Myself, together with my two sons and my daughter-in-law, I've been encouraged to do this for many years. We formed a nonprofit organization of designers, engineering, and development, because I have learned there are a lot of nonprofits, but there are very few of them that have the technical skills on development and design. And so we thought, and particularly for myself, who retired from my practice 4 or 5 years ago, but couldn't stop thinking and volunteering and working on some of these things, that this would be a fantastic vehicle of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. If anyone has any question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Cecil, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, so my name is Cecil Brooks Jr., proudly related to Samuel Brooks, Mott Haven Historic District. It's great to see familiar names here. So I would like to just really give thanks. I caught the latter portion of this presentation, and I do think, to answer the question for what it's worth, the outer boroughs, especially the Bronx, have been overturned because the tension, I feel, in New York City has been decentralized with the pandemic. And as someone who worked on the open streets legislation very closely in the Department of Small Business Services, we thought a lot of these open space initiatives would just be in Lower Manhattan, Midtown, and Brooklyn. But to see how many people took it among themselves to form hosting committees and partnerships with organizations like all across the 5 boroughs, including in Staten Island, it's been really beautiful. And I think with a lot of us not having to commute to the center of the city, the traditional center, we have more time to appreciate the beauty, the architecture of buildings, to think about lunch spots, local businesses and restaurants, and even just thinking about where we can live, you know, just having more options pop up. So I do think that one of the great lasting things to come out of this unfortunate pandemic is just having more localized centers of urban life in a way that doesn't anchor us, you know, to skyscrapers and the bustle and chaos of the city. I hope that the beauty could be more of a focus as well, with the arts, you know, having so many challenges in education. But I mean, I love working in the Bronx, living in the Bronx. And now that I don't have to go to Manhattan for like all day, all week, that's something that's a huge shift in lifestyle.
Well, one of the things I'm hopeful for behind that is we're seeing increasing number of bicycle stations in the borough. I've been stunned that they've been coming up. I myself am not an avid bicyclist. However, I applaud them. I'm a walker. I'm a hiker. And I want to give a shout out to someone who's not here. One of the friends of my kids when they were in high school is a guy by the name of Navarro Lopez. Navarro is currently the Borough Commissioner, Department of Transportation, and he is hell-bent on providing more bike lanes and bike paths, in a way slowing everyone down to be able to appreciate and absorb the city. And it's really nice to see, I'll call him a kid, even though he's a commissioner, a kid that came from my neighborhood, went to City University, got involved in urbanism, and is now, transportation commissioner for the borough, and is really, from a resident point of view, is able to look at the city, not from some outsider who might live on Long Island or Westchester, but actually for someone, because I know he and his wife just had a baby and they just bought a house in the borough. So anyway, shout out to Navarro. Keep doing the good work. Anyone else?
Thanks so much, Cecil. Anyone else has a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. Thanks again, Stanford. This was a great presentation. My question to you is similar to what I asked earlier about participatory budgeting before we started. And how do you think participatory budgeting could apply to open street ventures or initiatives? I know you shared with me about preservation for us having a box to give information when we enter a block about the historical value of that area and significance. But in regards to open spaces, would participatory budgeting maybe have a factor or have a place or a role there as well?
Well, how are you going to pay for it? Where is the money to come from, and who decides community priorities? I mean, who sets them? How is the budget created? And then who administers this budget? I think there are ways, although I want to throw something out there. So someone who's come on screen, I haven't seen it all during the pandemic. Hello, Jocelyn. Hello, Jocelyn. So back around 1994, 1995, Jocelyn and several other people, and working in concert with Bronx Center and with Nos Quedamos, and with this bearded individual who's also on the screen. Hello, Brian. How are you doing? Was working on the idea of something called the Bronx Forum. Now, here we have this city is composed of 5 boroughs. Each one of those boroughs is registered as a county in the state of New York. They're the only 5 counties in the state that do not have local government. Our city council delegations never meet collectively in the borough. Now think about if we had a structural change, and if our city council delegations were required to meet at least once a month in the borough in public forum, right? Maybe there's a way to make participatory budgeting actually responsive on a borough-wide basis by throwing power back into the borough, right? When I was a hell of a lot younger, working for HRA on sweat equity, there was no HPD, there was no Euler process. We had the Board of Estimate, right? The Board of Estimate invested tremendous powers in borough presidents and also bypassed the people. But so the idea of participatory budgeting is, how do you set those priorities? And you and I were talking before, and I know we're going to talk after, and there are a number of different categories. How do you put the money there? And then how do you administer the money? What is the organizational and management structure that allows that money to be administered effectively? Because quite frankly, as participatory as we want to go, all it takes is I have to be polite here. All it takes is a divergent view at city council or in city hall, to throw that down. Giuliani, when he became mayor, we defeated him at city planning. He was trying to wreck the Melrose Commons Urban Renewal Plan. As a consequence, there had been $20 million that had been appropriated for site cleanup and fencing. If you recall that photo I showed you early on, here, all this open space, people were illegally dumping garbage. There were no chain link fences around it. No one was cleaning up any toxic waste. Kids were playing on them because there's not enough open space. And Giuliani, as a move of retribution, stripped the $20 million out of the Melrose budget in order to prevent that from happening, hoping that would cause the plan to cascade. He also tried to change the ULURP process, right? Putting words in that said, if there is a change to the plan, normally it would be subjected to ULURP, but he was only looking not to have a full vote, just to pass it around, right? And so here we look at these changes, we look at these challenges, the public participation. And the formation of Melrose, the community actually met. For the first time, a planning process was held locally for this large area. It wasn't held in City Hall. This is the first time that had happened, and it has been prevented from happening since then because city planning commissioners cannot get together outside of the city planning chambers. We need to change that. How can you, in this city of ours, which I understand has 9 million people in it now, how do you apportion this? And I think we have the ability to do it. And of course, the politicians, the elected officials, as Jocelyn and others were working on this, felt seriously challenged and killed it. Right? Yes, ma'am?
Hi. Hello, Peter. Sorry to jump in. I just wanted to pick up on where Peter was going. A couple of things on the participatory budgeting side. A good model actually is in Brooklyn, Brad Lander's district. Council member Brad Lander, who's now running for controller, has run, I think, a fairly successful participatory budgeting process there for a number of years. So, we could look to him and to a number of other council members in New York City. But that's at the council level, it's not at the borough level. With regard to the community participation or participatory planning, yeah, we worked actually very hard during Bronx Center days to put together a Bronx Community Forum as an offshoot of the whole planning process, the urban renewal planning process. And the idea was really to get people, to have conversations happen among community residents and businesses, but also, as Peter said, to bring people up to the Bronx, to meet with residents and discuss planning issues and development issues there. Of course, that didn't materialize. We had an old Supreme Court building that we had identified as an amazing place that could have been developed further to provide that space for meeting. And that's something that I'm really interested in pursuing, the whole idea of community spaces and places that where people can engage with each other, and we kind of need it desperately at this moment, throughout the United States, where people can meet and discuss things and debate and come to some kind of consensus on issues. So it's something that I'm continuing to look at. I know that Harry DiRienzo, who Peter mentioned, was also very closely involved with Bronx Center, is also looking at, the community building aspect and participatory planning aspect. And I don't know, I'm just throwing something out there, using community gardens, using open spaces, using public libraries as these kinds of places where these meetings can take place. Anyway, I'll let Peter carry on.
I want to point out one thing. Jocelyn also worked with us on the workshops, the monthly workshops we held. on design issues. And one of my colleagues at the American Institute of Architects said, "Oh, you're crazy. It's a poor community. No one's going to come out." And guess what? Every week every month, there were more and more people coming out, because as one person said to me, it's the only place I can go where I can actually talk with my neighbors about the future of the place where I live and feel as if my voice can be heard. And at least I'm participating in that. And I particularly think, looking at the post-pandemic world and how we're going to cope with that, and how our children are going to, and how we can use this as an opportunity to grow. This is one of those ideas, right? Because quite frankly, it's really clear a lot of our social systems have broken down in this country. I mean, rightly so, because most of them needed to be rebuilt. But we have that opportunity now.
Thanks so much, Peter. So we're running out of time. We need to wrap up our meeting. So I want to thank Peter and everyone who attended this meeting. I'm gonna be sending a recording of this meeting. And if you're interested in learning more about the Historic District Council, please feel free to email me or visit our website, hdc.org. And thanks so much.
Well, okay.
Peter, thank you so much, Peter. It was a pleasure having you on.
My pleasure. By the way, I've noticed that Edwin Pagan is on, and I want to throw a shout out to Edwin. Aside from many, many other things, he hosts on the web, the Latin Horror site. And I mentioned the movie Fort Apache, the Bronx. Under Edwin's suggestion this Halloween, I watched Vampires versus the Bronx. I would put that out to all of you, because it is a film
I saw it last week.
In the South Bronx, right? And it's about gentrification, and it's about community participation, and it's got vampires in the old courthouse. Anyway, thank you all, guys. This was a lot of fun for me.
Thank you.
Love you, Peter.
Hey, Ellie. Have a good one, everyone. Good seeing you all.